And welcome to everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Paul Goldbart. I'm Dean of the College of Natural Sciences here at the University of Texas at Austin. And it's really good to see such a broad array of participants able to join us today. College of Natural Sciences is very pleased to partner with the Cockrell School of Engineering, Dell Medical School, Jackson School of Geosciences, and the College of Pharmacy in making the film Picture a Scientist freely available for viewing by members of our UT community. This important and at times painful documentary chronicles the experiences of women in STEM. But the work of reckoning with these experiences goes beyond women. As a leader of a scientific college, I sit on the same side of the table as you, knowing that my role is to understand that amid current injustices and inequities, we can and indeed must find opportunities to deepen our commitment to one another. Inclusion and equity are bedrock values here, and it is incumbent on every member of our community, not just the women, to step up and do our part. You'll hear reflections about the documentary from our panelists this evening, and you'll have opportunities to share your own thoughts too through the course of tonight's program, where we're welcoming faculty, staff, graduate students, medical students, and postdoctoral researchers, as well as members of our Women in Mathematics and Women in Natural Sciences programs. Thank you to all the members of our UT community who helped make the documentary viewing in tonight's panel possible. And thank you also to our visitors from other campuses who are joining us tonight. Welcome and thank you for being here. And let me say thank you too to Professor Peter Stone from Computer Science for first bringing this movie to my attention. The final thanks goes to Dr. Shelley Payne, our moderator for this evening and my trusted advisor for diversity and inclusion. Shelley is the Marie Betzner-Morrow Centennial Chair and Distinguished Teaching Professor in the Department of Molecular Biosciences. She also directs the Lamontagne Center for Infectious Disease, and as you'll know, if you went to her recent marvelous inaugural lecture, Shelley's research focuses on the genetics and regulation of virulence factors of gram-negative pathogens, including Shigella and Vibrio cholerae. I'm pleased to turn things over now to Shelley, who will introduce tonight's panelists. Shelley, thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. First, I'd like to take a moment to thank Heather Lee and all the other members of the communications and events team for all their work in getting this together. So thanks, Heather. I also want to recognize my colleagues and diversity officers from the co-sponsoring colleges. Christine Julian from engineering, who's also a panelist this evening. Sam Moore from the Jackson School of Geosciences. Renee Salazar from Dell Medical, and in particular, Skylar Walks from the College of Pharmacy. Skylar was responsible for organizing us to do this as a joint event. So our panel today includes Nancy Hopkins, who is featured in Picture a Scientist. Nancy's a molecular biologist and Amgen Professor of Biology Emerita at MIT. She is known for her research on vertebrate development and zebrafish as a model for cancer. She is also well known for her work promoting equality of opportunity for women in science and particularly in academia. She's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, the National Academy of Medicine, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Caitlin Casey is an astrophysicist here at UT, where she studies the origins of the universe's most massive galaxies and the prevalence of dust and gas in the cosmos. Caitlin has received several awards, including the Newton Lacey Pierce Prize for Outstanding Achievement in Observational Astronomy from the American Astronomical Society. Caitlin views her roles as a researcher and educator at UT with equal levels of enthusiasm, leading new paths of discovery in the universe's most massive distant galaxies and sharing that excitement of discovery with both undergraduate and graduate students. Monica Hall-Porter is a member of the CNS TIDES team, and I'm not going to tell you what TIDES is because I can never remember the acronym. Prior to joining UT, she was professor of biology and chair of biology and health science programs at LaSalle University in Newton, Massachusetts. In her current role, Monica collaborates with the TIDES instructional team to conceptualize and implement professional development programming in STEM. Having heard Monica this summer, the Black STEM and the Ivory Symposium, I'm delighted that she is now a part of our college. And Christine Julian is the Annis and Jack Bowen Endowed Professor in Electrical and Computer Engineering at UT. She is also the Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Cockrell School of Engineering. Her research is at the interface of mobile computing and software engineering, with recent innovations focusing on device-to-device interactions within the Internet of Things. So I'm really delighted to have this group as our panel tonight, and I think this is going to be a lively discussion. So we've heard a bit of Nancy's story in the film. So now I'd like to turn to the other panelists and ask them to share a little bit about their experiences. And so Caitlin, I'd like to start with you on this.
Sure. Yeah, so it's wonderful to be here and to see this great group assemble. I can speak, as maybe someone on the younger end of the panel who's just been a faculty member for 5 years now. And I finished my undergrad degree 13 years ago. So I came at this world of experiencing discrimination in a different era, potentially one where folks had thought a lot of things have been fixed already. And I would say that, by and large, in my experience, I didn't really encounter many problems professionally until after I earned my PhD and started elevating up the academic ladder as a postdoctoral scholar before I became a faculty member. And my experiences ranged from everything from, being mistaken for a secretary, being whistled at in the hallway by faculty members, being accidentally left off publications or studies that I helped instigate. Also just being told to be more cooperative, that I was too bossy. On the most extreme end, I had an incidence of basically being stalked by a professor who was over twice my age, who also had direct influence over my career in terms of what telescope time I was able to secure. So, I transitioned from not thinking this was very important at all or not relevant to me, thanks to the work of, earlier generations, to realizing how impactful this was on my own career, and that it was out of my control. And I very much wanted my career to be in my control. And so, ever since then, I've, kind of taken a 180 and realized how important this work is to improve the climate, not just for women and women of privilege like myself. I have kind of grown up in an academic world, and also I'm a white woman, and I've benefited from white privilege my whole life, and it's just let me see another angle to discrimination, and that we are not the meritocracy that we aim to be.
So Christine, sort of what's been your experience?
So it's interesting to me listening to Caitlin's story, because even though I'm slightly more advanced in age than Caitlin, I got my undergraduate degree 20 years ago, or 21 years ago almost now. My experience is very similar. I mean, I grew up as a white woman in the United States, or white girl to a woman in the United States, quite a privileged childhood. I grew up in an academic bubble, although my parents weren't scientists. I knew I was going to be in STEM from a very young age. And, from the time I realized what science was until I got my undergraduate degree, I really experienced very little negativity, didn't really sense that there were any roadblocks to me doing that. Everyone around me was supportive of me doing that. my friend group. I mean, all of my friends were kind of in the same space. Even in undergrad, I mean, I started in biology, which was fairly evenly spread between men and women, but then I added computer science later, which was definitely much more in the minority as a woman there. But even there, I mean, our cohort of students was very tightly knit. It didn't really occur to me that I was at any kind of disadvantage until I started the PhD program. And I think even in early years of my PhD, I was in a small group. My advisor was a white man, but the group always had a couple of women in it, and there were strong female faculty mentors at my institution. And so it was only when I started going out a little bit, going to conferences to present my work, and then looking around and realizing that 90% of the people here are men. You know, I had one incident in graduate school at a conference where I didn't know anybody. I was in France, and a very senior male faculty member made advances in a way that I didn't feel particularly safe. We were at the conference social event, at least it was in a big group. That was kind of the only saving grace. So that, I mean, that kind of stuff started to happen, and I started to realize kind of the bubble that I had grown up in. And then I think, again, similar to what Caitlin said, is as I advanced further along in my career, you know, different things started to crop up, and I started to kind of question even myself, like, do I want to stick with this? And obviously I did, but, you know, from sexist remarks happening at interviews when I was interviewing for faculty positions to the very first faculty meeting I attended being asked, genuinely, to be honest, very genuinely, if your husband is at work and you're here, who's taking care of stuff around the house? And it was kind of like, that's my introduction to kind of academia as a woman. And so it was, you know, just a lot of those kind of microaggressions kind of digging at you after a while. I mean, to the point, like, I think the most recent thing that happened, I was at a project meeting and I'm an expert in the room presenting my research to other people. And someone's asking questions of a different male colleague who honestly, and by his own admission, didn't even know anything about the work that I had done. And so that was a pretty kind of, you know, just those kinds of things kind of pile up over time and make you kind of question, you know, what you're doing. But I mean, I have to say, I also agree with Caitlin in saying, you know, I feel lucky. I feel very privileged. I've had a lot of support and a lot of very, you know, positive experiences with both male and female mentors over the course of my career that have definitely supported me to where I am now.
And Monica, who Dan Knopf reminds me is with the Texas Institute for Discovery, Education, and Science. So how about your experience?
Well, first, thanks for having me participate in the panel this evening. I really feel lucky to be considered amongst a group of such esteemed women in science, and so I'm appreciative of the space that I'm holding tonight. Thanks, Dan, for reminding everyone of the acronym. That was the first thing I was going to say, so thank you so much for assisting me with that. It's like an alley-oop or an assist, so I really appreciate that. What I'll say about my experience as a woman in STEM and as a Black woman in STEM is that my professional path has been peppered with microaggressions. And I will say I've experienced them even recently, but the most prominent ones have been people wanting to touch my hair. And that has been interesting. I've developed several different ways to diffuse that. I say, can I touch yours? And let it sit there. Right? You know, I appreciate not doing that because I am not a thing, I'm a person. However, I'd say that's been the most prominent thing that surfaced in my career. I've been mistaken for event staff at a hotel before. And, you know, just about any other thing that you can think of as a professor. So prior to coming to UT, I've held professorships at 2 small liberal arts colleges in New England. And there is something to be said about being the first Black professor that students have had. And that's manifested itself in some very beautiful ways because students transform their thinking about what and who a Black woman is or a Black woman can be. Right. But then it's manifested itself in some very interesting ways. I never will forget one of my first interactions with the dean, serious interactions with the dean of the first college I worked at. I walked into the lecture hall one morning and I was in a good mood and I spoke to the students and I said, "Good morning, scholars." And one student thought that I was talking down to them because they had never been seen as scholars before. And that was a major complaint that went all the way up to, the higher administration as a concern, because a parent was concerned that I was talking down to the students. And so that's kind of been my existence, the frequent microaggression, folks assuming, or people assuming, that I was affiliated with an HBCU because I was the only Black woman in the room, and I just happened to know something about a project that they were working on, and they happened to have a collaboration with an HBCU. So there was an immediate connection of me with an HBCU, even though I wasn't, I was only remotely familiar with their work. So just mostly microaggressions. But what I will say is that I have been fortunate to have the support of several prominent white males, specifically, and white females. And so I've had some really good mentors that have helped me along as I've proceeded. But one thing I do have in common with Caitlin and Christine is that it seems like some of those microaggressions and environmental things, they got worse as I progressed in my career.
Yeah, and I think this idea of intersectionality is important. I think that women who are Black, Hispanic, other aspects of your life can really increase the impact of a lot of these things. And I think that came out with some of Rachel Burke's comments in the film. So I think that's something that we need to think about and talk more about. So Nancy, what do you see are the things that have really changed and what hasn't changed?
Unmuting there. Gosh, well, I'm sort of stunned by what I've just heard. I think we've just heard what hasn't changed. But I had thought about, in preparation, thinking about this evening and so forth, I was thinking about how much has changed. And I hope you understand, there really has been such enormous progress. Of course, I really am very old, so you have to remember it's been a lot of progress.
Not that old, Nancy.
not of time for it to happen. When I was a student, literally women couldn't get jobs in universities. So that fact alone is hard to even comprehend. When I was in college, there weren't any women on the faculty at Harvard, these kind of places. So that was the biggest change of all. And then I have to say, though, when I do look back on it, and when I watched this movie, Picture a Scientist, and when I listen today to these women talking, what really strikes me is how long it takes to make change, how slow it is, and how we aren't there yet. I certainly thought by the time I retired, other women would not have to take this up. And that's really what kept me going, just to, we're kind of on a roll. Let's get going here, because the more you do, the less somebody else will have to do. So it's quite stunning to listen to the stories I just heard, which are essentially identical to the ones that we dealt with 50 years ago, 40 years ago, and right down to the fact that when you're young, at least I didn't even know there was a problem, literally. And then I began on the faculty, began having problems. They got worse and worse. And finally, it took 20 years to even accept that there were problems or to understand what was going on before actually taking it on and addressing it with the institution in a sort of major way. When I think about what were the things that are so dramatically changed, just to encourage everybody, about how much change there has been, it was seeing women in positions of power. And even quite recently, we just could not have imagined these things. So seeing a woman become the president of MIT, this was something I didn't expect to see in my lifetime. And I remember very well when Susan Hockfield arrived at MIT, and she was introduced to the community, and there was a huge lecture hall, and people were standing in the aisles, and women were crying. They really couldn't believe your eyes. And this was 2004, I guess. And after she was introduced and she spoke, a young woman came up to me and she said, a woman faculty, she said, I never wanted to be the president of a university, but until I saw Susan Hockfield walk into that room, I didn't know I could be the president of a university. And I realized then why it's so critical to have women in powerful positions from the top of the organization all the way down through it. If you don't see people ahead of you who look like you, it's very hard to imagine yourself doing these things. So that, I think, was one of the big changes I saw and why it was so important. The other one, the biggest one, I think you really won't believe this. This is amazing. But when I was young, this question of how could you combine family and work was so unimaginably hard that, first of all, few women even tried. And more than half the women who were on the faculty, who were very small in number, did not have children. And in fact, when we did our work on diversity, which 25 years ago, we discovered that no woman had ever taken family leave and gotten tenure. That's not that long ago, right? And the reason they didn't take family leave was because people did not believe a woman could have a baby and also do science good enough to get her tenure at MIT. So they were afraid to take the leave because of the stigma that was attached to that. So men took family leave and they started more companies, did more research, but women did not use it. So one of the biggest changes was when that was discovered and MIT embraced this report and said, we're going to fix everything. They built daycare on the campus, and suddenly there were babies on the campus. I mean, I just never will forget the first time I saw a faculty pushing a baby carriage onto the middle of the computer science building. I thought, oh my gosh, the world's come to, this is real change. And it really was change. And now today, women come to MIT and almost all of them have children. They have children as junior faculty. They take family leave. They get tenure at the same rates as men. So these are changes that, the real change happens, right? But, and I would say the third thing that has been fantastic really to watch and be part of and to see has been our understanding of this problem. I think maybe if you're young, you don't appreciate as much as I did. I mean, we were working in the dark. We had no idea what was going on. We were trying to figure it out. And I think the reason the MIT report had the impact it had was we were able to convince people by collecting data and documenting these inequities, which really were invisible. People didn't even believe individual women who tried to speak up. They couldn't really quite believe it. So it documented that, and it showed you could show that these problems really existed. And then the university, of course, responded in an extraordinary way at the time. But the thing that blew me away was the research that the psychologists were doing, which I hadn't known about when we were doing our studies. But in the movie, the work of people like Mazrin Banaji at Harvard about unconscious bias. And so suddenly, here was this science. Oh, okay, now I get it. Of course, it all makes sense. We all unconsciously undervalue the work of women, even when they're equal or better than the men. So I think the progress that was made that came from all of this research has really provided an explanation for what so many people see and experience and have trouble explaining it. And then the fact, of course, that you can talk about it and you can work with your institution and actually try to address it. That may be the biggest change of all. It's what we're doing tonight, which was completely unimaginable for the first 20 difficult years that in the system.
Yeah, I think one of the things that many of us has relied on is having female colleagues that we could talk to about these things, and having a group of women that we could share experiences with and talk about. But ultimately, we need to bring men into the conversation. And several of the questions that came in from people registering had to do with how do we engage men in the conversation? And just, how do you talk about these issues without sounding like you're complaining but helping them to understand what the issues are? So, Caitlin, have you tried talking with male colleagues about this? And what kind of response do you get?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll say that I have evolved in my approach on, talking about this topic over the years. And I started out from a very timid position and I wasn't particularly in any position of power as a postdoc. And I was scared to talk to anyone about it, much less men. So, I started out small and, first, I think for me, it was really important to gauge like why I needed to talk about it. And in the first instance, it was very much an acute problem of mine. Like, this is a problem that's inhibiting my career right now, and I need help. And so I started out speaking to, female mentors of mine, grateful that they existed, obviously. And then that gave me the courage to, go to the director of my institute at the time and, bring some of these issues to light. So that was, me addressing what was immediately in front of me as a barrier. And then more broadly, I think, since I've kind of gotten out of that environment and experienced a much more positive workplace environment, I've switched to more, general advocacy and broadening people's awareness of this issue, because having been in a position where I felt not so affected, younger, at earlier stages of my career, I know what that feels like to just, kind of have a vague awareness that these topics affect people, that these, people's identities are important. And so I've used different techniques. I'll just mention one technique that I used fairly recently when I gave a plenary lecture at a meeting of the American Astronomical Society. So this was a lecture that was it's supposed to be 100% science, but because this is become a part of who I am. This advocacy work, I felt it necessary to mention and discuss this other aspect of my scientific career in the talk. Now, I've done this numerous times before, but it always seems a little disingenuous to just put it on a slide right before the end. And so I changed it up at this plenary lecture by actually just confronting it right at the beginning, contextualizing it a little bit. And then throughout the talk, I just included little snippets of my experiences from microaggressions to macroaggressions on the bottom of each slide. And also towards the end, discussing more broadly issues, colleagues, people of color, experiences that they've had as well, just to highlight that these are persistent and weave in and out through your pursuit of science. So I didn't actually talk about these scenarios at all during my lecture. I focused on the science, and I kind of meant it to be, distracting at the 10% level, because, we all spend a lot of time thinking about these issues at that level. And that was kind of the point of that exercise, is to bring awareness in a way that did not actively detract from my attempt to get the science across.
What kind of feedback did you get from males in the audience about this?
Oh, it was I was very nervous to do it. There were something like 1,500 people there, but it was by and large all positive feedback, especially from young students who were there, and so that mattered most to me. And I only had one grumpy old man come up to me and say it was awfully distracting during the talk, and I highlighted that was the point.
Monica, what's been your experience with engaging male colleagues in this subject?
Well, you certainly want to be strategic in your approach. And I think one of the easiest tools to employ is calling people into a conversation versus calling them out for their behavior. And so when I speak of calling someone in, things like if someone says something that is offensive, you say, "You said this, but I want to understand what you mean. Did you mean this?" And then give them the opportunity to clarify. The last thing you want to do is put someone in a position where they feel backed into a corner and they don't want to talk to you. And so if you can call someone into a conversation versus calling them out for their behavior, I think that's a more strategic approach. And I've done that a few times. I tend to have a little bit of a feisty personality. And so sometimes it's a mix of calling out and calling in all at the same time. And so, but I'm working on that aspect every day as well. So.
And so, Christine, you have a leadership position in your college, and I'm sure that there have been conversations with male colleagues about these issues. So what have you found is effective or not?
Yeah, so I mean, even before I had the leadership position, I experienced some of these things, and I had a mix of kind of similar experiences as the others. I think that I've seen a shift over, say, the last year or two, maybe 3, of male colleagues being more attuned when things happen and coming and actually checking in. And usually it's privately. It's like, I can't believe that just happened. I heard this. Did that have the same impact on you that I think it might have had on you, which I think is progress. I think, of course, the next step is for them to say that in front of the group of people, instead of just to me, the person that they're fairly confident is going to agree with them. And so I think kind of pushing people in that direction is another. In addition to the kind of trick sounds like the wrong word, but approaches that Caitlin and Monica have been talking about. Another one I like to do is kind of, especially for these microaggressions, in order to make people really feel them, is to put them on the spot a little bit. So I've used one in class before. So I teach programming courses quite a bit. And so in a programming class with junior and senior students, one of the things I will do is I will actually pitch out at some point in time, we'll have a kind of actual conversation about this. It will be the point of the conversation. And I'll say, in a previous class, a student trying to compliment another student told her that she was the best female programmer he'd ever met. So, like this is a microaggression. And they'll be like, really? I've been wondering what a microaggression was, right? And so then you can kind of walk through it. Like, imagine if someone said to you, you're the best male programmer I've ever met. Like, it's going to put you off a little bit, right? And so we kind of like, there's that flip to kind of talk through it. And I think that's helpful. And I completely agree with Monica. I think the other thing that's important is normalizing these conversations so that you're not just having them when there's a person in the room who is defensive. So you're not calling out someone's behavior, but you're kind of constantly having the conversation. So you don't bring up a microaggression only when it happens. You bring them up at other times as well, so that people start to learn and recognize them themselves. I think that's kind of one of the most important pieces of getting the conversation started and shifted.
Yeah, and a number of women had expressed concern that raising these issues, particularly with people in leadership, can come back to haunt them, can have a negative impact on their career. So Nancy, were you concerned at the time that this was, or were you comfortable enough in your position that you didn't worry about that?
I can't imagine doing what I did if I hadn't had tenure. I mean, I don't think you would have survived it. I really don't. And did I worry about it? I pretty much assumed that it would have a negative impact. And I put it off as long as I could. I only did it when I really felt I just couldn't go on any further. I just couldn't be a scientist any longer. And I wasn't ready to retire. I was too young. I'm not rich enough. So, and I loved science. I really did. I just couldn't live without science. So I decided to stand and fight. So I am really impressed by the 3 things that I've just heard from Monica and Caitlin. I mean, that's fantastic that you do that. One of the problems I always had was I was a person who was completely clueless until I was in the situation. So I felt completely privileged as a young person. I was told to be a scientist by Jim Watson, my advisor. But I mean, these faculty tell you got to be a scientist, forced me to be a scientist. So what was the problem? I didn't get it. I was recruited to faculty jobs. I'd never, whatever. So I really didn't expect to encounter it. And I did. And I could see how it would be hard for anyone to understand it, because it took me years to understand it and even believe it myself. And so I would say to people, I really think my work is not credited the way other people's is. But that's a hard thing to say, because everybody thinks their work is not credited, right? So then, of course, they say, oh, that happens to me too. And what can you say, really, right? And it went on like that for 20 years of and it was very, very hard. And so I found the amazing thing that happened at MIT, and I don't know how commonly such a thing could happen. The women got together and kaboom, they'd all come to realize what was going on, but they didn't know who to talk to, if anybody. And suddenly they had each other. And when you have all but one of the tenured women faculty in the School of Science, somebody's going to listen to you. Okay, they all signed on. And in fact, even just having 2 was hugely powerful. 3, I mean, there weren't very many. There were only 15 tenured women at the time, 16, 17 plus 2. So it was a tiny number, but these were tenured women who were, some of them already hugely successful. So having that, then the administration was going to listen to you. And they did. And I have to say, once the administrators at the top were people, I think people in administration often are very interested in these issues. I mean, I know the president of MIT had worked on diversity issues all his life. They thought they understood them. And they were shocked to discover they hadn't. And they were amazing people, actually. And once we all got together and worked together, that was a life-changing experience. So if you can make it work, everybody benefits, the institution, the people involved. And so in the end, I have to say that I think I was one of those rare lucky people. I met amazing people. I met presidents of all over the country. I went around, I gave lectures with the president of MIT. It became an extraordinary experience, but it's a tough thing to do by yourself alone. So my hat is off to these 3 women. I think what you're doing is amazing and very powerful, actually. Yeah.
So Christine, were you ever concerned that you had to think about possible impact on your career if you raised these issues?
Yeah, and in fact, to be honest, I think that was kind of telegraphed to me, especially when I was a younger assistant professor, when I would kind of talk to male mentors or, people I considered to be trusted allies about the things that were happening to me. Either explicitly or implicitly, I would get the sense, keep your head down. Like it was kind of, fly under the radar. You need to get tenure. Like don't rock the boat. This isn't the thing you should make a stink about. And I think that one of the things you learn from that is that there are going to be negative ramifications of, these things that are kind of seen as complaining. Like is it that my work is getting less recognized? Am I being asked to do more of these things and less of these more technical things? Like it's those kinds of kind of microaggressive sort of things. And I think the other place I've experienced this is actually in my professional community. And so, I think in my professional community, I may be considered one of the more outspoken advocates for diversity. And I mean, kind of similar to what Caitlin's saying, although she's even bolder than I am, but just even in a kind of public town hall meeting saying, hey guys, look around, and literally guys, right? Look around, there are very few women here. We need to do something about it. And being told by kind of senior members of that community, that's not our problem. We can't fix the pipeline problem. Or in one case being told, it's kind of unrelated to the question, but being told by a senior person in the organizing committee, I had a really strong female student once, but when she graduated and had all the prospects, she decided to prioritize her family instead. So it was really just a waste of all of my effort publicly in a town hall meeting. And it's just, and then the same kind of thing happened after, I said all these kind of strongly worded comments about how we needed to take this into consideration. We needed to start working harder as a community to do this. A lot of the younger students, younger faculty came up and said, oh yeah, we do, I'm in, thank you for saying that. It's really important to me too. And so that's emboldening, I guess, but I do feel like that has had a negative impact on me and kind of being, maybe again, this is just me sensing that or complaining about it, but me being engaged and invited to do more of the organizing things in that community. And so I think that, it's kind of what I was thinking as Nancy started talking, which is you kind of, eventually it's too much, right? And you weigh the benefits of not doing anything versus doing something. And you gotta change this, you gotta change it, right? So.
Yeah, so Monica, you've been an advocate not only for women, but women of color. And were you concerned about this negatively impacting your progress in your career?
Oh, absolutely. Because the worst thing to be called as a professional Black woman is the angry Black woman. And it comes from a place, that label comes from a place of sheer ignorance, because anger is passion is mistaken for anger. And that's one of the things that I've been told, been warned about, had to tried to really be careful of getting that label, and for very small things. I recall I did not fill out a form, or I did not place a form in the correct folder, and an admin, when I was a postdoc, basically in a meeting about, I didn't fill out this form correctly. By the way, it was for request for vacation time to attend Barack Obama's first inauguration. And so she was not happy that I didn't put my form in the right place. And so there was a pretty big dust up about it. She made a big stink of it. And in the meeting, and I stood up for myself, and she said, "You're just angry. And that's unprofessional." Because I was standing up for myself. And then when you go to stand up for others, though, what you realize is that your work does have a place. It has meaning, and you get small reminders that you should be doing it. And those reminders can come from many different places, but absolutely, it's definitely a concern, because you don't want to be labeled as the angry one.
So Caitlin, you've clearly spoken up, and both in the college, you've been great on the college diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, and in your professional society. But do you have concerns about that could have a negative impact?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say at UT, I've felt emboldened because I feel like this tremendous support system, which has been really wonderful to work under. I would say, certainly earlier in my career, and just like as a child even, it has been drilled, like Christine said, it's been drilled into me not to ruffle feathers and to, keep my head down. The only thing I'll bring up as one anecdote of trouble I encountered is, when I was dealing with these acute problems as a postdoc and raising that to the director of the institute. After that moment, I never had another science conversation again with the director. He wasn't interested in that. And then on behalf of I was the one in the department to receive an apology letter from someone who was causing problems for many people. But, I was handed this letter as if I'm a representative of all women who have ever, had this problem by this fellow. And so, I've seen it and kind of experienced this recoil where like, oh, we don't want to, get anywhere near you because you're going to complain that there's some problem. So we're not going to risk talking about science with you. That's been real to me. But, I've been very fortunate to not experience that recently and not at UT. And I think that's, feeling supported and recognized as a scientist is very, very important while you push advocacy of these topics, and it can very easily feel like you're the one who's interested in diversity and you're not a very serious scientist, and we really need to step away from that narrative.
So I want to come back to the point that Christine raised in the story about the professor announcing he had a woman student, but she dropped out. And this was something that came up in a number of the questions that were submitted. Data indicate that women leave academia at a higher rate than men, and it's particularly true for women who are mothers or caregivers. So do you see academia changing in a way that's going to support women who choose to have children as well as those who don't? So Christine, you want to start with that?
Sure, I can jump in here as a mother of two. So I've done this twice while I've been at UT. There's been a lot of work, a lot of very strong efforts to try to find ways to make things like, caring for young children or caring for elders, or just other things that tend to disproportionately fall on women's shoulders in our society, to make that work with tenure track faculty positions or researcher positions. Unfortunately, there's been a few studies, I guess, that show that some of these policies, while they're well-intentioned, actually disproportionately harm women. And I think Nancy kind of alluded to this at the beginning, the fact that women were afraid to take the stop the clock provisions that were allowed because of what the perceptions might be. We've extended the stop the clock provisions, and so men can also take them now too. But there was a study a few years ago, I think, in economics departments showing that when men take them, it actually disproportionately affects women's advancements, because the bar is effectively raised because the men are actually tend to be using the time to boost their publication records. And so I think, these are kind of unexpected ramifications of policies, and we have to think about that. I think we have to keep doing it. I think there are possibilities and ways that we can still make changes and still kind of think about how we're considering when we do advancement decisions, how people were impacted by different things that happened. I think it's a hard nut to crack because there are lots of moving cogs on that wheel. But yeah, I think we're making progress, but still a lot of work to do, I guess.
So Nancy, is this something you've seen changing, that women do feel they can have a career and a family?
Well, as I say, the difference between my generation and the current one is just astonishing. I mean, these young women are all having children. I say that I think almost all the women faculty I can think of now, young at MIT, do have children. And as I say, do it, and they take family leave, and they did track their data for quite a while, Christine, to follow along where they're going to get tenure. And of course, men also, they encourage men to do it also, but you had to show that you were really using the time to do family care. You weren't out making yet more companies, you were doing it family care. So, and they tried to introduce a lot of flexibility into it so people could really negotiate what they needed. So I think it made a huge difference. I have to honestly say, I don't know how they do it. So I think there's still a reason why there are so few women, right? It's still harder. And I myself think this is a major issue that is going to have to be pushed on in many ways by this bold generation. It's clearly so far ahead of where my generation was. I mean, for example, I think about funding. I don't know about all your funding situations, but say the NIH. I mean, if you're having, this should have flexibility to it, so people in certain situations can, whatever. I mean, there are things we can't change, but there are things we can change, right? And funding and how it's done is one of them. So if it's in the years when you're taking care of a parent or you've got a child, or whatever it is, why can't there be an extra 2 years on it all? I don't know what, if a person's going to keep doing their work. So there's so many things that could increase the flexibility so that people through the long career they have could be adjusting these things so it works for everybody. And men and women should do this together. I mean, I think until we see family as joint responsibility equally, how can it be equal really, right? So again, I'm just so impressed by it's so interesting to me to hear what you say, because it is so far ahead of where we were at your stage. I've got to tell you, you got this one under control.
So, Monica.
So speaking of doing this together, it's a joint venture of partners doing it together. I have a good friend who wrote a fabulous book called Drop the Ball, Achieving More by Doing Less. And that book was about basically choosing what it is your highest and best use everywhere, from your professional function to your household and everything else, figuring out ways to get it done where you don't have to be the person who's directly doing it. And so I think one of the things that we all have to do is prioritize and decide exactly what it is that takes precedence in our lives. So for example, my career is not based on research. My career has been in teaching and learning in STEM. And so I made that choice after a series of events and postdoctoral training specifically in teaching and learning, and thinking, wait a minute, there's a whole other skill set that I can tap into. So I'm going to choose this. I'm going to make the conscious decision that this is my highest and best use. And then I'm going to find someone who wants to actually embark on this journey with me as a true partner. And I have 2 children as well, a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old, who I'm praying do not get loud during the time that we're talking. So if you see me, do something, if you see my arm moving, that's me telling them to go back and go to the other room. But what I will say is that, making the conscious decision about what it is most important to you, I think is really key to having the successful career that you want to have. Because again, as my mom told me, she was in higher ed, she says, you can have all the things, but not necessarily all at the same time. And I take that piece of advice with me, to not try to get everything at the same time or do everything at the same time as well. So, but one thing I will say about things changing for women too, is that we have to remember to support each other as well. because I've heard some remarks and seen some remarks that are indicative of a lack of support within our ranks. And as one of the poems that I learned as an undergraduate, it takes a real woman to stand and cheer while the other one stars. It really does. And I think we have to start doing that a lot more as well.
Caitlin, anything to add on this?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't have children yet, but I can speak to one thing that I find really interesting that's come up in the conversation in the astronomy community recently, like very recently, only this year, but I'm really encouraged to like just see people talking about, and that's the impact of academic careers on delayed parenthood and fertility issues too, because these not only affect women, they can also affect men, and they are very relevant to LGBT couples, anyone who has to have fertility treatments to become a parent. That is often side by side with advanced maternal age, which is common when you're just working so hard on your science throughout your career. And then you get to the point where you feel stable enough to start a family. And then, of course, because biology doesn't change, it's often more difficult for folks to start families. So I've had a number of colleagues my age, really close friends around the world who have gone through really difficult treatments, medical treatments. IVF is not an easy thing, right? And that has impacted whether or not they're able to go to conferences, whether or not they're able to accept invitations for invited lectures, whether or not they're able to function fully in their teaching jobs, in different capacities. And it's a complicated issue, but I'm really encouraged to see that conversation starting, because it is often such a taboo topic to talk about, that struggle to become a parent, which often I think is very relevant to women in academic positions, but also everyone in academic positions from a variety of perspectives.
So I think there have been some questions coming in from attendees. So Melissa, I'm going to let you, as we're running short on time, but see if we can get in a couple of those questions.
Great, thank you. And Shelley, I want to ask you to join as a panelist as well, your own experiences and thoughts. So I will actually address this first question to you and then ask other panelists to chime in as well. Both in the Q&A and in the RSVP, we've received a lot of questions about your perceptions of the climate specifically at UT Austin today, whether things have gotten better in recent years, and how we compare to other institutions across the nation. So we'll start with Shelley, and then I'd love to hear from others.
So, I think we're making progress. I'm impatient, though. I don't think it's nearly fast enough, but we are improving. We're recruiting more women faculty. We have more people of color now in the faculty. So I think we're seeing some diversity. It's just not nearly where I would like for it to be. And I think that we're still at that level where you look around a room and you notice that there is a Black faculty member in the room. And I want it to get to the point where you don't notice, because it's such a diverse group that you're not sort of counting how many women are there or how many Hispanic faculty. So I said, we're making progress. I just don't think it's fast enough, certainly not fast enough for me.
Monica, you're fairly new to UT Austin. What's your perception been since virtually arriving on campus?
Well, so what I will say is before my family made the decision to come to Austin, we were warned that there were not a lot of Black people in Austin, and that was a reality that we were going to have to get used to, specifically at the University of Texas. We were reminded of the struggles the University of Texas has had around representation of people with people of color. And it's been my perception that there are efforts But I believe that, like Shelley, I'm, a little bit uncomfortable. And I tell you, the first thing I did yesterday when I heard about an initiative to bring more faculty of color to UT, I emailed it or sent it to about 6 people that I know who will be looking for faculty positions very soon, because I believe in bringing others along with me. So I had really busy fingers at the tail end of a meeting sending that information out. So as far as representation with women, I really don't have a good idea of how that looks. But if I go into the directory, I do see a lot of female faces. But I do want to hit on something that Shelley did say. She's like, you don't want to walk into a room, right, and know that there's a Black faculty member at UT. Well, think about that Black faculty member who does not have the luxury of missing a meeting. So it's one thing to experience something because you know it happens, but it's another thing to experience something because you are the person that it's happening to. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind as we increase the numbers of BIPOC individuals at all levels. And that's the other thing. We want to make sure that as we are increasing BIPOC and female presence at UT, that we do it at all levels of the organization. Because again, you want to make sure that when students walk onto the campus and they think about and reflect on their experiences in the College of Natural Sciences, you want to see them represented at every level. So.
And I will say, just, looking at the college, you see that there are women in leadership positions, but very few of our departmental chairs are women. But you look at the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, other things that, and then you see those are predominantly the women, faculty, staff, students, and people of color. So yeah, we're not where we should be yet, but I'm still hopeful.
Thank you both. We've also received questions about negotiations and reflections on your own hiring packages, salary, and startup. If you had resources or people to turn to, what advice you might give people facing similar milestones. So Nancy, would you mind taking a first stab at this one?
Yes, because when I was starting out, we had enormous resources that I went to MIT because we're starting a new building. They had fantastic resources. So pretty lucky. Most people who go there are lucky enough. The idea that people would have different packages had not crossed my mind. And so again, so long ago. And it was actually, when we go back to the MIT report, the one thing in it that's wrong was we thought that we had no evidence that junior faculty weren't all treated the same actually when they came in, because you couldn't actually get the data. You wouldn't be able to get, it was too few numbers and the fields are too different. And only years later did somebody actually do a study and find that in fact, of course, the startup packages were not the same. So I think it's a really good idea to talk to somebody who has experience in that field and in that place and ask them. I was having dinner with somebody last week and they said, somebody came to us with the startup package. We looked at it and said, oh my God, I mean, they just couldn't dream up the amount that this person was asking for. Just couldn't even imagine it, So you want to at least know what's going on. You don't want to be in the dark when you're doing this. You want to be up to speed and be reasonable. Sometimes I actually think men ask for too much. It's not that women ask for too little. I think men ask for too much. But hey, if you start with less, you're going to end up with less. So really good to get advice on this one. Yeah.
Christine, what about you? Are you asked by younger female colleagues for advice in this area? And have you found resources to be helpful?
Yeah, I'm not often asked about this, which maybe is a telling that women aren't asking. And so maybe that's on me to reach out to, students who are applying for jobs. I think, one of the things that Nancy said is really important, which is, you got to set yourself up to be successful, right? And if you don't have the resources you need to succeed, you're starting off at a disadvantage when you start. And so I think approaching it from that perspective, what do you legitimately need to make you wildly successable as an assistant professor, especially for an assistant professor startup package? And so, that's what I would give as advice. Yeah, I mean, I was in the same boat. Like, I was just so excited to get offers. Like, I was terrible at it, and I wish I'd had better guidance when I was doing it myself. So I also feel bad that I'm not the right person to be giving out that advice. I feel a little off step there, but yeah.
Thank you both.
I do want to be respectful of our panelists' time. We're at the 6 o'clock hour now, but I will impose on you for one last question. And I'd like for each of you to give us one thing that you think we can do now that would make a big difference. So Nancy, do you mind starting again on this one? Oops, we have you muted.
Here we go, yeah. Well, this is the hardest question there is, because I honestly don't think there's a single thing that solves this problem. As you know very well, Shelley, we've.
Oh, I know. I'm looking for one step we can take.
One step. Actually, I don't know how many of you saw, but I did think there was a wonderful article in PNAS in September 15th of 2020, written by 3 of the people who were involved in the National Academy of Sciences report. And the first author is Kate Clancy. And these people, I think, really understand this problem well. And they talk about this very issue of how there's no single answer. And it really requires institutional change. And that's what I saw. If you don't have from the top leadership, those people can really make a dent in this problem. And if they say, this is what we're going to do, folks, then that's what you're going to do. And they can make that go down through the whole institution. And those are the people who should be solving these problems, not these young ladies, with all due respect. I mean, I admire what you're doing, but the chairman of the department should make it easy for people to talk about these problems in that department. And the university should be rewarding these administrators for producing the results that we all say we want. If you don't put your money where your mouth is, then you're not really doing the job. So I'd say power from the top down. Yeah.
Caitlin?
Yeah, I totally echo, of course, what Nancy has suggested, and I think top down is the easiest for us for sure, who are in the midst of it. But from the perspective of what can I do, what can you do, I feel that one of the most important things is to have honest and frank discussions with colleagues without beating around the bush too much. I've had so many conversations about these topics over the years where just, people are alluding to something having happened, or, maybe like, referencing a vague rumor, but, it's not clear to anyone quite what happened, and no one feels very comfortable about talking about it because it's unpleasant and awkward. So I think normalizing discussions of specifics is very helpful for people to just understand the impact of specifics. And whether or not it's a taboo topic or not, I think it's important to kind of normalize these discussions, because I really think that people learn best through examples.
Monica?
So a couple of things that I find most useful in my toolkit is the idea of lifting as you climb. So figuring out who you can bring with you that can share in the positive aspects of your career. And then also too, getting out in the community and doing work that is impactful in your area of expertise, and also outside of your area of expertise. And 2 ways that that's manifested itself with me is working with an organization in Massachusetts that I loved called Science Club for Girls. And you understand that it works. This past year, I actually saw that a young lady who dissected a heart with me when she was in the 1st grade is now a senior neuroscience major at Harvard, and she's headed to medical school. And so I just found that out, this was the little girl that used a plastic knife to actually open up the chambers of the heart that I had already pre-cut with a scalpel. So you've got to bring others with you. You have to.
Christine, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, that's dangerous. I don't know, it's the last word. So I'm going to interpret your what can we do to include.
Yeah, and I'm using we in the broadest possible sense.
I'm going to include everybody who's in the room. So I do want to thank everybody who showed up and listened for this long hour. I think it shows commitment on your part and dedication to helping out, and that you're taking the problem serious and you want to learn more. And so I really want to thank you, and then offer the challenge that Shelley just gave to us. to everyone that's here and kind of think about who you're going to also bring to the conversation and how you're going to go do that, and take the tips from Caitlin and Monica and Nancy about just normalizing that conversation, pulling the Band-Aid off and saying these things are happening. They're happening to our women faculty, they're happening to our faculty of color, and we are going to be part of the solution. You're coming with me and you're going to be part of the solution. So I think that's an essential like marching order, I guess, I give to everybody who's in the room still.
So what a wonderful way to end the conversation tonight. Thank you all for coming, and particularly to our panelists. I know you get called on to do these things, and it takes time away from family, from science, from other things, but it's so important to engage everyone. And this has just been a wonderful evening for me. So thank you all again.
I just want to say thank you to the panel and to Shelley and the organizers. Terrific discussion. I think we all learned a lot. We learned a lot philosophically, but we also learned some practical things which will really be valuable. And just to add my name to the list, I'm impatient too. Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll make progress together. Really appreciate everything you're doing. Thank you.